It's very difficult to follow such a performance, and I'm just a book historian. Until recently, I studied Soviet children's books, and no one really cared about it. But then this letter set came across and destructed and put an end to the alphabet as I knew it, at least the Latin one. So I thought to try to I'm struggling to find words again. And I thought that the alphabet would perhaps be a place to look for it. So in this talk, I will first step into this virtual media war that Christopher talked about and present you to images that you all know of Russian child performances of the pro-war letter set. And then I will move into my own research and relate these contemporary images to children's collective embodiment of propaganda in Soviet child correspondence, living newspapers from the late 1920s. And then at the end, I will try to discuss how these historical Soviet experiences may or perhaps may not explain the contemporary return to manipulation with children's minds and bodies for political propaganda. And I'm sure that all of you in the audience know these images. Journalists became puzzled in the first weeks after the invasion by the spread of war propaganda images of this letter set, which was a seemingly empty signifier that the Russian army painted on the tanks to recognize and avoid shooting at their own troops. And this letter it had no meaning. So both international and Russian media attention helped the letter set to a kind of viral fame or infame. As a pro-war symbol, it soon became associated with the Russian word Tsar, or pro-war, pro-us, or Zapad for the Operation West. But this virtual letter set also had a very physical dimension because Russian pedagogues began instructing children down to kindergarten age to participate and embody war propaganda in this regime-controlled flash mobs, as they were called. And these flash mobs were part of the psychological mobilization and social control with children, parents, and the general population for military aggressions. Soon, media began circulating images of Russian children making collective group performances of the letter set, and social media commentators were dismayed by this misuse of children's bodies for propaganda purposes. We know from modern linguistics from the 20th century, Saussure and so on, they have told us that signs are arbitrary. That means that there is no relation between the signifying sound or letter combination and the signified concept or idea of a word. That's just based on pure linguistic conventions. But in her studies of avant-garde experimental typography, Johanna Drucker has demonstrated how the visual and material form of the sign does take part in the signification process. According to Drucker's History of the Alphabet, written letters are not just simply arbitrary signs, they are direct visual embodiments of meaning. So throughout its 3,000 years of history, alphabets have inspired, for example, analogies between the shapes of letters and the human body. And if you look at the illustration to the left, you see the first page of the Kremlin court pedagogue Carrion Istomin's primer from 1692, where the armored knight and the annoying little boy co-shape the initial Cyrillic or Latin letter A. And these figure-ornamented initial letters, they are well known also from the European Renaissance books. So it's not like specific to Russian print culture. It's our common
cultural heritage. If I jump to the early 20th century, Czech and Russian avant-gardists did not break with this tradition. They continued to work in this print culture tradition, and the example you see up here are the photographs of the Czech choreographer and dancer Milica Majerova's letter performances. You can also find them online. I don't have time to show her dance, but they were printed as photographs in Nesval's primer in Prague in 1926. And in line with these avant-gardist approaches to self-referential letter experiments, the Russian formalist emphasized the materiality of the signifier. And this was against the Marxists who thought that like the deeds and the political actions are more important than empty words. Of course, these avant-gardist experiments was something that took place within an artistic elite, but eventually they also translated into early Soviet pedagogical practices. And here you can see child correspondence in Perm around 1928 to 1930, who performed the daily news. So in these living newspapers, pioneer brigades are using their bodies to form collective ideology-based or ideology-loaded signs and emblems. So in the picture above is from a journal that offers instructions to the stenographers. And here the children collectively embody the Soviet acronym that is MUD, that is short for International Youth Day. So the children, they are the concept that they embody. They represent the youth that the sign is supposed to show. And below you see a photo of an actual performance taking place, where you can see how children combine acrobatics, dance, sports, and so on to state the acronym of the newspaper. It says JTG, Living Theatre Newspapers. So you can see how several bodies are used to combine and compose one letter sign. And there's a clear hierarchy between the children. So the youngest pioneers, they're just acting dots or perhaps brackets even, while the stronger and taller, they can do the more complicated letter performances. So as letter carriers, the children act both as medium and as message. Apart from letters, there were other types of emblems and symbols. For example, pyramid formations became extremely popular to illustrate growth and progress, or the fulfillment of the first 5-year plan. And here on the left side, you see how youth brings Lenin's mausoleum to life with a pyramid movement. Lenin is dead, but the children are supposed to live out his ideas, to bring his ideas to life by fulfilling this future promise of communism. In the pedagogical journals, however, the trainers began criticizing cases where children were overburdened by doing 5-story pyramids. So children were untrained amateurs and their backs were harmed by this physical load. So one critic said, like, how can you demonstrate newspaper article content, like the purpose of electrification, by doing a headstand? It makes no sense. So this means educators did not criticize that the children propagandized communism, but they criticized how they did it, or that they could be harmed by doing the gymnastics. So here is a concern that the communist concepts become detached from the initial content or idea that the movements are supposed to signify. Pyramids risk becoming empty signifiers, pyramids just for the sake of pyramids. So, if we put it all together, we can ask ourselves if such historical Soviet experiments of collective child performances actually explain the contemporary apparent return to indoctrination of children's minds and bodies for political propaganda purposes. And I'm not a historical determinist, and I don't believe in any alleged Soviet mentality, also not any Russian mentality. I think I've never seen evidence of that such a thing exists. And it should certainly not excuse any contemporary compliance to war propaganda. I think as historians we should also be careful not to try to squeeze our historical sources into a fixed framework of reinterpreting the past now only through the lens of the present events. But when I do present this artificial montage of disparate propaganda images that are separated by 100 years of history and belong to two very different political contexts, my intention is not so much to point at the obvious similarities of children performing letters. It is just as much to highlight some of the contrasts here. Because if we compare the contemporary images to the 1920s communist educational practices, it should be, I think it's quite striking that the contemporary inhuman set performances, they lack all the acrobatics. There is just no dynamic body movements here. The drone footage you see to the left are recorded by a children's hospice in Kazan, where children come to die. The kindergarten kids up there, and I'm probably, now I'm sharing images of children, that's probably not ethically correct, but all these images are out there anyway. But these children, they are just lying flat on the floor. They are not moving. As a performance genre as a whole, flash mobs are often characterized by actions where the participants freeze, or they fall down on the floor, or they play dead. So I think the current propaganda is rather kind of necrophile. It is static. It's a static approach to children's embodiments of political messages, and it also fits to this phenomenon that certain social media commentators call a zombification of Russian society today. Yeah, okay, I finish now. I don't want to downplay the disastrous consequences of revolution and civil war in the early Soviet society. But when I read the communist pedagogues today, I still read out a future vision for children in these texts. In contrast, the current regime in Russia is not funded on any coherent ideological thought, and there's no vision on a future for children and generation. In contrast, it deprives not only the children in Ukraine of a future, but also children in Russia. And luckily, there are still, and I think this deserves to be mentioned, that there are also critical voices in the ruins of Russian civil society. For example, among the Teachers Association, the Union of Child Psychologists, and so on, who, for example, post self-help guide to parents on how to resist this misuse of children. And my last point is that when we look at these propaganda images, they also have their limitations. And this goes both for the historical resources and for the contemporary media images. That propaganda also always offers only a kind of distorted image of reality. We do not know what the children themselves think about being on stage. Do they have any agency to react on what are opposed upon them? That's it.
Thank you.